So cool. So the idea today is we've got a bunch of contributed topics, and we're going to go through and have a vote. So we'll start voting on which topic to kind of start talking about. We'll rank them in order of kind of preference, and we'll spend 5 minutes on the first one, and then after 5 minutes, I'll get everybody to kind of put their thumbs in the air. If you put your thumbs sideways, you don't care whether we continue or stop talking about this. If you put your thumbs up, you wish to continue talking about this topic. And if you put your thumbs down, you wish to move to the next topic. And we'll just keep going down until the session runs out in about 35 minutes. So that's the idea. So what I'll do first is I'll start listing all the topics. And we'll talk through kind of what they are. And if there's any confusion, we'll ask the writer, the person who actually contributed the topic, to start talking about what they meant so that we have a good idea. And finally, kind of one thing that's going to happen is I'm not really going to be contributing a lot to the discussion. You guys are. We have mics around the room. And the idea is that you're going to be contributing, having a discussion about those topics. So what I'd like to set as a ground rule is we only talk from experience. So this is like personal experience with whatever the topic is. So if you have heard of a tool, if you've trialed a tool, if you've just heard of something, or if you've just researched a tool, let somebody who's actually tried it, who's used it in production, have the discussion, share their experience. And otherwise, that's basically the session. That's basically what we're going to go through. So quickly, I'll run down through all the topics. And if something isn't clear, I'll ask the person who wrote it down to explain it to us. And I've tried to group them into kind of somewhat similar groupings. So there's a couple of groupings already. And so, for example, the first two topics, metrics for continuous integration feedback, and then the other one is pipeline metrics, which to collect. So that's kind of metrics on continuous integration. We have what metrics are quality measured by. So how do you measure quality? We have Jenkins versus CI versus GitLab, or CI/CD tool of your choice. Why that tool? How to convince team, how much flexibility to offer the team. Ease of use. So who contributed ease of use? Excellent. So when the mic gets to you, could you give us a little bit more about kind of what you mean by ease of use? Like, where would you like the discussion to go?
Well, basically, the idea is about the user interface in this case. Okay.
So is that talking about different solution and which one is easier to use?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do with ease of use, and I'm going to bring it to the tools discussion, right? This is about like discussing which tools you've used and comparing different tools. So we have container image building. Who contributed that topic? Sorry. Could you have this mic on?
So for CI and CD, sometimes building container images is important.
Yep.
But how to build images efficiently on typically Kubernetes cluster?
Okay. So is that like kind of about Kubernetes?
Mainly Kubernetes.
Okay. So I'm going to bring that with CI/CD for Kubernetes. We have versioning, tagging images. I'm guessing that's fairly straightforward, like best practice for tagging images. Ensuring test reliability and flaky tests. So how do you kind of make sure that your tests are reliable? Rollbacks, which is quite an interesting question. So how do you, once you've deployed it, how do you roll it back? What do you have? Reproducibility. Running end-to-end tests with hardware devices. What's the simplest and most effective workflow from Git commit to production? So I guess workflows and pipelines. And I'm going to bundle that with pipeline definitions, declarative versus imperative pipelines. I know it's somewhat related only, but... and also integrating an approval process, because that seems to be about workflows. How do you add an approval process to your workflow? So how to do CI/CD if the whole ecosystem is locked down, that you cannot implement any of the continuous deployment principles. Who wrote that one? That seems like a specific pain point that you felt. Seems like this one comes from pain.
Yeah, hi, sorry. I'm Christoph, and yeah, I actually worked in the SAP world. So I did test automation for a big German corporation where we automated like most of their business processes. And what I felt was that everything we learn here and that we learned in university and so on, this does not apply to the SAP world, at least what I learned. And you know, this was like a whole new world to me. So I used all these great tools like continuous integration, and you have none of that in that world. And it's also, no one knows about that. So that's what I'm feeling. And so I think that we somehow need to bring that into this world. So because I'm here now at this conference, and it feels to me like this is like, you know, back to reality. Like this is the good world, and SAP is like the bad world. They don't know what's going on. So the question really is: so how can we use the knowledge and change all these lockdown places?
Okay.
Like, yeah.
So I'm going to bring that actually because that sounds like it's a human problem, not a technical problem.
It is a human problem. Yeah.
So I'm going to bring that with how do you convince your team? Yeah. Cool. So we can't hear you. Could you raise your hand so we can bring a mic to you? Yeah, actually, that's a good question. So it's the question was, I'm wondering whether it's coming from a product management or a developer. So could we just have, yeah. So could we have a hand up if you consider yourself a developer? All right. So like the vast majority of the people in this room are developers. Who's kind of project management? 2 people. All right. So like the vast majority of the audience is development, which is quite interesting. Cool. There's one here that says about 1 platform, 50 services, 5 teams, 3 dev staging prod using Kubernetes. Who wrote this? Okay, excellent. Could you share with you what you want to get out of that discussion?
Yeah, so that was basically if you had those requirements and you wanted to have a CI/CD pipeline for Kubernetes, I'd be interested to hear what people have put together that's been successful for them. Okay.
So would it be okay to bundle that with like tools of choice? Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Cool. Continuous deployment and canary releases. I think that's reasonably explicit. Like, how do you do canary releases when you've got CD? How do you do kind of the automation? And this is one. There's also automated pushers to production or just dev or staging. I think I'm going to bundle those 2 together. I know they're unrelated, but really the question is, what do you automate? How do you do advanced deployment? So there's quite a few questions about advanced deployment strategies. There's a couple about CI/CD on and for serverless, which is quite interesting. So how do you do CI/CD for serverless, and how do you do CI/CD on serverless? And I think I'm going to bundle the 2 together about serverless. There's managing feature branches. Monorepo is alive, yes. What are the best practice for a monorepo? Build once, deploy many strategy with Kubernetes. I'm going to bundle that with the build strategies one. So this is kind of like talking about the build strategies. How do you advance build strategies? How do you deal with secrets? What's the deal with secrets? What is GitOps and GitOps versus ownership? So this is our fault. I'm very sorry about the GitOps term. Yet another kind of term coming to the market, but it's our fault at Weaveworks. So this is kind of what the hell this thing is. Accessing new environments from tests. I think that's the right one. Who proposed that? Excellent. And I'm going to just guess that you're talking about kind of how do you set up a Kubernetes cluster from your test environment. Is that right? Or am I? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah. So how do you deal with access control for your test Kubernetes environment from your CI pipeline, basically? One big versus many small. How to divide. That really, I think, lives with the monorepo.
No, that's intended to be
Okay. So this is a system issue. So what system do you mean?
Your CI or CD systems.
Oh,
Should
interesting.
you run like one for the whole company, or should you have like one per team, or how do you divide it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely different. So like, how do you divide your CI pipelines and your CD pipelines, like in your organization? Multi-project builds, PPC, ARM64, x86, and test engineering best practices. Okay. Does that stand on its own, or does that live with one of the other ones we've talked about so far?
Just options for doing building products with multi-arch support.
Okay.
So.
I think I'm going to keep that on its own. And then Artifactory repository. I guess that's a particular repository, like you're talking about a particular tool. Who proposed that one?
Yes, we are new to the container world, and
Yep.
then at the beginning we thought a image repository is enough to deliver our product to our customer, but then we got this idea we need to actually use the Artifactory repository to do that. I'm wondering if that's a must or not. If it's a must, then what's the best practice for that?
Oh,
To
so you're
use it?
talking about
Yeah.
delivering a product to customer through an
Yeah.
artifact repository.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And the final one is chaos engineering and continuous integration and deployment. So how does chaos engineering fit into CI/CD? So those are kind of the topics we've got. I'll go through them once again. And what I'd like you to do is raise your hand if you think this is an interesting topic to talk about. You get as many votes as you want, but I would suggest you restrict yourself to the ones that really interest you, so that we can kind of prioritize. Yeah, if you vote once for all of them, I'd prefer you abstain. It'll make it easier for me to count. But otherwise, that's about it. So we'll start with what metrics are quality measured? How do you measure quality, and what's important? Anybody wants to talk about that? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Metrics to look at the actual pipeline. How do you monitor your pipeline? So metrics for CI feedback and pipeline metrics, which to collect. Like, keep them up while I'm counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Thank you. Is the mono repo still alive, and what are the best practices for the mono repo? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Managing feature branches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Serverless and CI/CD. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This is about advanced deployment strategies, like how do you do canary releases, how do you promote between environments, what is the kind of different... Okie dokie, yeah, that's not actually a surprise considering the discussion I've been having. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 35, 30. All right, yeah. So I'm going to call it 40, just about. Pipeline definitions, declarative versus imperative. How do you set up workflows and pipelines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right. This is the next one is about like practical experience for particular tools. So like Jenkins, GitLab CI, ease of use. Which tool do you prefer? What's the tool for the right use case? Okay, that's quite good as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 35, so just below the advanced deployment. How do you convince the team? How much flexibility to offer devs? Like the human side of how the hell do you make this happen? 1, 2, 3. 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. End-to-end test with hardware devices. 3. I know what you mean. Like, if you're having to do this, you feel the pain really keenly, but it's not very clear what you have to do. Reproducibility. How do you create reproducible builds? What do you care about? 1. Versioning, tagging images. How do you deal with versioning? And I'm going to, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't want to be rude, but we're halfway through the session, so I think we should probably pick the biggest one. Anybody like keenly wants to vote for a later one? We have about 45 minutes actually. But, okay. So who wants to share experience about the advanced deployments? You're quite right actually. I lost track of time. Anybody wants to talk about, just quickly, show of hands, flaky tests? If it's less than 40, I'm just going to skip. Multiple project builds, different architectures. Rollbacks. Okay. Accessing environments from tests, accessing clusters from test environments. Artifact repositories. Chaos engineering. Okay, and GitOps. Okay. Gonna call that the third one. And secrets. Okay, cool. What's that? Which one?
Top right corner.
This one. Oh, right. This one.
Lower. CI/CD on Katie's clusters.
Oh.
No.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Who cares about kind of CI/CD on Kubernetes in particular, rather than general discussion? Okay, that's about 9 people. All right. So who wants to share experiences about the Canary release advanced deployment patterns? Who'd be the first to do that? Who does it to start? Right. In that case, you get to start talking about how you do it.
I gave a talk on Tuesday about how we do deployments at the New York Times through CI/CD and Git. You can watch a session. I think it'll cover a lot of what you're looking for here, but specifically for this Canary deployment, we started with deploying we started deploying our master to our cluster in a low replica count alongside with our production and high replica count. And then through our CDN, we would split the traffic so that it routes the majority to the production cluster and then percentage to the next version. And then people would just track the metrics for that. We're thinking about moving to Istio so that you can, when you deploy, you can configure how much traffic you actually want Istio to split for that deployment, so that when you deploy to production, you are determining the split of traffic to your Canary deploy.
So what tools are you using to manage that split, and do you automate the scale from that?
So for that, we are planning, for Istio, we're just going to use the config. So when you run your deployment through the CI/CD pipeline, Istio will inject the updated configuration to your cluster, and then we'll split the traffic for you. We're not planning to do like incremental Canary analysis, just a static percentage analysis. So yeah.
Okay. Anybody else has done? Yeah.
I thought it was good to ask a quick follow-up question, really. How would you deal with a Canary release that requires a schema change?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So for things that are doing schema changes, Martin Fowler has a page on implementing your schema changes in a way that you have multiple versions. Like if you're doing a schema change, you're going to create a new column, for example, and keep the existing one. And your code should be updating both, for example, until you're confident that the new one works. And then, so at any time, you should be able to roll back at least one, migrate back one version. And then when you're confident, then you can drop that on the next schema change.
So who else has actually tried to implement some of this stuff in their pipeline? Do you want to talk to us about what you experienced and what you used?
So we were not doing anything on Kubernetes or containers, but we took our VMs and we just partitioned 1/10 of them to be our Canary cluster in production. And what we would do is, for a manual process to deploy, we had a tool to help us, but we would deploy to the Canary cluster and observe and see if latency or error rates build up unevenly compared to the other clusters.
Okay.
So
like, it seems like only 2 people in the room have actually experienced kind of advanced release, like, oh, we've got some more over there. Would you share kind of what your strategy was and how you implemented it? The microphone is just behind them.
But I will probably just repeat what he said about the schema changes. It should always be like the one it's in that book. You have the developer handbook as well.
Yep.
So the schema change in the database will be forwards compatible. So it will just add things, not remove things. And then you detect that in the early stage. So you would detect it in test or staging environment when you do the DB migrations, which you of course should have as well. So, and that works. You find in breaking changes in earlier on production that way.
Okay. And just behind you?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on maybe 2 things that we've seen that are common misconceptions. I'll get some technical detail as well if desired. But first thing is a blue-green deployment is not a canary deployment.
Yep.
Blue-green is typically designed to test intended differences between applications or features because you know you're doing something new, and that's what you're looking for. A canary deployment, you're not looking for a difference. A difference is a problem. And so the approach is that you want a slightly different. Another thing that's worth bearing in mind with canaries, and I've done this many times myself, so that's the traditional canary I always did was I have my production version, I spin up a small number of instances of a new version, I route traffic to them either by sticking them behind a load balancer and just making sure the numbers match, or if I have something where I can explicitly control the percentages, like with Istio or something else, you set a specific percentage. And then you just wait a while, and then you look at some monitoring dashboard, and you pick some set of metrics that you think are relevant, and then you make a sort of, well, it looks okay. And that's fine, but that's a really, really basic kind of homebrew canary. Like proper canary, if you think about a statistical test, because you're really trying to do a control experiment, you should never compare a small new version against a large existing production version, because they're serving different amounts of traffic, and one has been warmed up in the cache and all that kind of stuff. So what you really should do is you should spin up a control, which is your production version, and a canary, and then you should route the same amount of traffic from the same geographic locales or the same population set to these 2. And then if you really do it properly, you should do a statistical analysis to compare both of them. And there's plenty of statistical tests that will do this. And then, of course, you automate that, because you don't want to do that by hand. And I'm not saying everybody should go there or needs to go there, but it's worth bearing in mind that Netflix, for instance, that's what they do for canary analysis.
And so what have you got experience setting this kind of stuff up?
Well, the people I know at Netflix do. So unfortunately, I mean, they do it with an internal service that they've just open sourced called Keyenter. So if you search Keyenter on the internet or automated canary analysis, you'll find some stuff.
Vote time. Would you like to continue with this topic? You don't care, or you want another topic? All right, most people want to move on. So the next one is tools of your choice. What tools do you use? So can we have some good suggestions on tools that you have used and you have personal experience with, on kind of the things you've for doing CI and CD? Any particular pitfalls, any particular issues with the tools that you've used?
Yeah, we're a big fan of GitLab runners. So if you're still using Jenkins and haven't used it, try it out. It's a very, I like the agent system that has this polling mechanism, and it fits very well with containerized software and microservices. So
okay,
it's.
How many? Like, I'm just going to repeat the question for the recording. How many teams do you have working on it?
We are a research institute in the Netherlands, but so it's often small teams, but it's growing and growing. So over 20 or so, I would say, in an organization of 3,000 people. Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's increasing a lot. Yeah.
Do we have anybody from GitLab in the audience, actually? Because I know GitLabs are here today on the floor. Okay.
Can we just say with tools as well, can we sort of ask generally why, when people sort of describe why it is they're choosing what they're using, or what alternatives they've looked at and chosen against? Or
Yeah, how did you evaluate the tool?
Yeah, what they're valuing against, or what else they might consider in the future.
Yeah, maybe the configuration lives very close to your code. So with the GitLab CI YAML file, yeah, easy to set up. We used Jenkins before, but we found it quite tough to. Of course, you have this Jenkins file descriptions as well, but and it fits closer to containerized software, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, we had a.
So we started with Jenkins, configured with Kubernetes plugin. And basically we had a dedicated plugin for Jenkins developed inside that was used to configure Jenkins itself, provision it with all the credentials, all the plugins and stuff. And we were building a containerized Jenkins that we run on top of Kubernetes, configured so that the build pods would spawn dynamically on each job, with each job. And users were all they had to do was to have a Jenkins file alongside the code repository, and basically they defined their jobs there. And in the end, project was scrapped because GitLab CI with YAML configuration had more appealed more to the general development public than customized. Well, not customized, but well, somewhat customized. We had some custom DSL going on. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So you found that like you had a system where you were dynamically bringing up build pods through like Jenkins instances.
Correct.
On Kubernetes.
Correct.
And I imagine like there's a lot of configuration, a lot of effort to get that running.
Yes.
And then you find out some of the kind of the off-the-shelf solution were a little bit smoother, like the developer experience was smoother.
Developer experience was smoother because of YAML files.
Yeah.
Comparing to the groovy Jenkins files.
Okay.
But otherwise, the functionality, build times was very similar. And we had, in contrast to GitLab CI, all the configuration for Jenkins was as code in Git.
Anybody else actually went the other way around, who like the customized build system?
So we were using GitLab and then switched to GitHub, which meant we could no longer use the GitLab CI. At which point, most of the evaluation I did was against CircleCI and Jenkins, a few other ones, but having configuration of the jobs as code was key, so that ruled out some tools in the industry. I can agree that, so we use the Kubernetes plugin with our Jenkins, and so we're building pods, and the configuration is quite complex. It's easy to abstract it with Jenkins libraries, so the developers don't have to be so exposed to the complexity, but still not so ideal. That being said, the Jenkins X tool is kind of just coming out, and I did some evaluation of that the other day. I was really impressed with how quick and easy it is and how it gives you everything. So for people who are just starting out in the CI/CD thing, I think this is definitely a tool to really consider. But be careful, because one of the reasons why we're not going to consider it at all is like you build out these container repositories, but there's no backup structure, there's no high availability, there's no resiliency to Jenkins X. So you have to do a lot more work to make Jenkins X production ready, but it is a tool to consider in starting off.
Okay, interesting. I think there's 2 points on there. So one is the amount of time you spend on actually, when you're doing it yourself, the amount of engineering time you spend on building it, managing it, maintaining it. So that's the first one. And the second one is configuration as code for your build pipeline. So would anybody has a kind of interesting insight and experience on either of those two topics? Yeah? You were about to raise your hand. I saw it like halfway up in the air before you.
We also evaluated quite a few services, but eventually we went with Drone. We were on GitHub, so we can't use GitLab CI. It does look really enticing, but Drone has like a very similar kind of declarative pipeline manner. We just completely abandoned Jenkins because it was not the way to go. And we productionized our CI system for the entire company. We have about 200 repos on there, moving towards 500. 14,000 builds a week, and then we are looking to scale that up from 10 workers to about 20 soon. But it's pretty satisfactory for our purposes. I know other companies run it in production, like Reddit, Capital One, Squarespace, that kind of stuff. So it's worked pretty well for us so far.
Okay. Before we pick up, do you want to continue with this topic? We've got about. Yep.
Just a very small question. Did you try Circle CI?
Yeah, Circle CI and Travis CI are kind of restrictive, and Drone is an open source project with an enterprise license, so we run it ourselves, and it's way cheaper, like 10 times at least.
So I'm happy that Drone was brought into the discussion. We also started using it with 4 to 6 runners, so it's not a big installation. I think it has a great architecture, and it has the open source approach appealed to me. Just bear in mind that it's also the hacker's approach. So if you are shying away from looking into the source code, then it's sometimes Drone has some rough edges. But if you are into the open source approach and you can read Go and stuff, I think it's a very nice approach, and actually I favor it compared to other solutions like the new Jenkins Sex and so on. So that's just my input.
Just a quick pitch for, I heard a couple people say they had trouble getting the Kubernetes plugin to work, and I would just, if you could come up and find me after the session, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what trouble you had, because with OpenShift, we provide a Jenkins experience on that, and it seems pretty straightforward for me to configure it, so I just wanted to hear more about what issues you had.
And then we had one here and then one here. So yeah, I think like some of the people who are building the CI pipelines are at the conference today, right? So I know the GitLab guys are here, and I think a couple more pipelines are here.
We in Zalando, we had 3 generations of Jenkins. First, it was few very big Jenkins machines in the data center that didn't scale at all. And the build queue sometimes grew up to 5,000 items. Then we had 2 generations, first running Jenkins on AWS provisioned with Ansible. Then we had another generation of also Jenkinses on AWS. Jenkinses means per team. So it's like more than 100 Jenkinses in the company. And in the second attempt of doing this, we had a custom application that was provisioning those Jenkinses. We also are moving away from that, but this thing is still alive and runs. And we ended up building our own CI solution, highly tailored, and more or less similar in the concepts to modern CIs that have just a single YAML configuration.
So how much effort did you put into building your own pipeline?
Yeah, a lot of effort. So it's a team effort for more than a year already. So, but we were making talks on other conferences about it. So if you hear about this Zalando continuous integration, continuous delivery platform, this is us. And so far, the benefits are that we have strict control of which team can deploy where. We have a lot of AWS accounts and Kubernetes clusters, and the compliance requirements tell us that it should not happen that someone deploys to some other team's cluster. And we also have control over which code gets deployed. We have approval system, and we record everything, so we can track back from the deployment to the commit, to the author of the commit that got deployed, actually. Okay. So it's a lot of work, and we also manage secrets. So in the builds, there are no secrets in the build environment. So no keys, no certificates, no passwords, no tokens, and all the outcoming requests to private resources are intercepted, and only HTTP, but HTTPS, and the authentication header is injected based on if it's coming from a running build machine, then it's injected. Otherwise, it's not. So, and there are many tweaks that we are able to do because it's our own, and the usage is growing and people like it. It's
so that's an
than
internal
Jenkins.
tool. Have you open sourced it?
Huh?
Have you open sourced it?
That's the most popular question, and we have it in the plans, but we did not open source it yet.
Okay.
So we still need to find a way for it, because if you start building it internally for your private use, you inevitably end up integrating it with other private systems, and there should be a good way of abstracting this and even understanding what you have to abstract and what you can open source. And this is not easy if you are the only one using it.
Okay. So as a final note, like, would you say it was worth actually the effort of doing that, or should you have gone off the shelf after like having spent all this time?
Well, you cannot trust me on that. I would prefer building my own, because I'm building it and I'm enjoying it. I see all the happy users, and other people quite often feel the same. So I'm talking to people who actually left our company, and they still say this thing was better than what we have now in my new company.
Okay, thank you very much. That's about time for this session if you want to move to the next one.